your art, your writing, your culture is the shell of other men's ambitions, ambitions beyond what you will ever understand.
I think about like when you see or you hear about something that would otherwise be so fucking insane in any other context, right? For instance, you know, you walk by a homeless person right on the street. The other day, I saw literally a woman with her leg up on a fucking newspaper or like one of those old kiosks in the middle of the street in downtown, fucking fingering her asshole. I kid you not. I mean, like, truly surreal shit. You see people walking around with shit all over themselves, like just people suffering in the most extreme, horrific ways that would be in any other context. If you were to have seen that, if that was someone you know, or, you know, like to snap you out of the malaise in which that we've just become used to or desensitized, that would be insane. It's insane that like we walk by that and you just look the other way. I mean, not even out of callousness. At a certain point, it's like you are incentivized to put on blinders. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get to where you're going. You know, like you would just stop every 5 seconds. Like even just driving around in a city, right? It's like, it's fucking insane. We're in these hunks of metal, you know, going insane. People barely follow fucking traffic laws and whatnot. You know, it's like it's actually more of a miracle that there aren't more car accidents, which is, I guess, a positive. But the whole thing is insane. But the idea is that we're desensitized to, like, you know, the inherent violence in a lot of this stuff. Yeah, like another example I have right here is like healthcare, right? We pay for healthcare. We don't have it free in this country. You know, it's not single payer. It's private. You know, we pay for private healthcare, whatever. That's a whole different topic. I get my bill and it's somewhere in the realm of like $300. You know, luckily I haven't had to use it, but it's there. I have no fucking clue. Even if I had to use it, there was one thing that popped up, like a dermatology thing that popped up. I didn't even know how to fucking access this shit. You know, I pay $300 a month. I go on the website. The website's shit. It's dog shit. I don't know. My primary care thing's taken up for months. I don't. It's insane to me. Something as simple as health. I have to pay a premium for a product, an in-between person that gets me, potentially helps me get to the product when I need it. It again, insurance doesn't make any fucking sense in the context of health. But again, like we don't question this shit. And like, I don't know, like life is tough, you know, and we've got shit. We only have 24 hours in a day, and it's like you got to do certain things. So I totally get it. I'm not saying that like we should, you know, but I think this gets into an issue of what I'm talking about is this particular paradigm that I've realized, you know, as I've gotten older. This paradigm that and it's not necessarily a red or blue thing or whatever, like a poor, rich thing. It's just this paradigm that has us putting up blinders, right? That you almost feel like at a certain point, I think either, you know, you double down on that as you get older and you just kind of put the blinders on and focus on forward and, you know, support your family, etc. And then there's the other people that go the complete opposite direction, which like, you know, freak the fuck out. I think a lot of what anxiety and depression is like freaking the fuck out in these blinders and trying to look the different directions and not quite being able to like take the fucking mask off, whatever it is, you know, that we didn't sign up for or anything, but it's hard to imagine another way, right? Like when you were to take that off, okay, now what, right? You know, and like, what is this, right? Like, why do we walk by the homeless people? Why do we see photos of dead children in other countries and just scroll through it? You know, like how can you compartmentalize photos in like whatever foreign correspondent, Al Jazeera or New York Times, whatever, that you follow on Instagram? You're going along, you're looking at like NBA highlights. You're looking at fucking funny memes, and then you see a dead child in Gaza or some shit, and it's like, oh man, that fucking sucks. Keep scrolling. Music video, Instagram thought, you know, like fucking tits. Like, it's insane that like that has just become a thing that is regular, you know. But at the same time, the sickness, the malaise comes from that we know that something isn't quite right. We know this doesn't work. You know, you get to a certain age where you're not an idiot anymore, you know, and it's like you've invested, you know, whatever into the political process, which I guess is, you know, the thing that comes to people's mind. Hence, they run, you know, the apparatus, the country in which we exist. So there's the political apparatus. And, you know, you kind of see after, I'd say maybe your fourth election, you know, as an adult, is like you start to see like, oh, man, yeah, like shit just really isn't getting better. And like all these people that we elect or that we, you know, we place faith into or don't do anything, you know, they don't really, or they do just enough, but they don't, like they said in the news that Biden passed a fucking infrastructure thing, or he didn't pass or whatever, or he did some things. The election cycle will ramp up, and one side will talk about all the things that their party did when they were in power, and you're like, I don't even remember that. I didn't touch me, you know? And it's like, you know, maybe it wasn't directed towards my economic, you know, level, or, you know, I didn't see it because I didn't live in a certain area of the country. Maybe. The point is that shit does seem to be getting worse, or in that things, maybe not worse, but things are bad, right? That's just, we know that. And the examples I gave of the homeless people, and whether it's, you know, healthcare or dead babies in other countries, it's like how in the era of, you know, in the age of 2024, where we have these fucking supercomputers in our pockets, and, you know, we've touched the moon and all this crazy shit. We're living in this era of insanity, AI, right? But yet all this shit keeps happening, right? Like, how is that possible? The way I see it is somewhere along the line, we as humans either adapted, or I would say forced, to start thinking a certain type of way. Now let me explain. When you look at a beautiful mountainside, for instance, right? Or you're on vacation and you see a beach. You're in the Gulf Coast and you see a beach. If you look at that beach, right? And your first thought is, I wonder how much property is here. I wonder how much it costs to live here. You know, like I've been with people, you know, and it's like, we'll be hiking. We'll see like a nice little area, and it's like, man, I wonder how much it costs to live here, right? If you were to hear like a musician, or a beautiful piece of music or something, you know, like a singer or some shit, and you were like thinking, man, they're going to be so popular. They're going to sell so many records, right? It's like, oh man, if they just like, they could be so big. Or even seeing a big musician and just being like, man, they're so big. I wonder how much this song that they're playing is so popular. You understand what I'm trying to get at? Is this idea of not being in the moment, but thinking about things primarily in an economic way, like a business-brained way, right? Instead of seeing things as they are, you're seeing numbers, you're seeing potential, you know, and you could see this as like a primary function of like capitalism, whatever. Let me fix my little mask here. But it's a business brain. I wrote down three names. It's business brained, a number Nazi, or corporate cuck. We'll probably leave that last one out because that's a little intense. But anyways, there's this way of thinking, right? Why do we think like this? You know, these are people that think like this. And maybe you don't think like this, and that's fucking awesome. You know, I think some of the coolest people I've met, you know, are defined by their proximity to the way in which they think like this. You know, and it begs the question too, is like, do we think like this because of the system, the algorithm in which we exist, right? Like, we have to support our family. So therefore, you have to think about numbers. You got to think about your time, your hours in the day as numbers. You know, you need to hit X amount of numbers so you can support yourself, or so you can pay off debt, so you can feed your kids, you know, whatever. Like, that's real shit, you know? So, or is there a certain element of like, is, you know, this an inherent part of human beings, you know, like, is this in our best interest evolutionarily to think like this, right? Like, is this a holdover from when we were hunting? I'm more interested in the former. I'm more interested in the idea that we are cows, or we're farm animals that are grazing on this beautiful hill, taking in everything, but we are slowly corralled when necessary to go to certain areas. I know what that sounds like. That sounds like a conspiracy theory. Really quick on conspiracy theories. I'm generally pro conspiracy theories. I think they're pretty entertaining at the very least. Some of them are true. Some of them end up being true. Some of them are just ridiculous, and I guess some of them can be dangerous to idiots, But I do think, the conspiracy market in the internet and in the has, conspiracies have gone mainstream, and I think there's a lot of bad actors in the space, as anyone who's probably clicked on this or listening to this right now already knows. There's the people that use that to build up fear and to sell supplements and whatnot. That's right. I'm not going to do that. I think a lot of conspiracy theories use this same business brain, number Nazi mindset that I'm talking about, However, I do think that the way in which we think and the way in which the world is by design. I just think that's a fact, and I've done a lot of research in my, adult life, having been paralyzed with anxiety with the blinders up, as I discussed earlier. And I think, through reading a lot of books, that it's pretty obvious that the world has been set up in a way in which we are incentivized to have a business brain. The number Nazis have won. It's over the course of this podcast, however long this goes, I'm going to try to cover this from a lot of different angles, This idea of a paradigm, right? A paradigm meaning, in a sense, like the sunglasses, the lenses that you put on to view the world. Think of They Live, right? Without the sunglasses, Rodney Piper is walking around just seeing the world as it is. And then he gets the magical sunglasses, puts it on, and he can see all of a sudden all the aliens and all the nefarious acts in front of him. What I'm talking about is a neo-paradigm, right? A new paradigm. A new way to view this stuff.
There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
If we're going to talk about who is in charge, right? Like who, okay, well then who's the James Bond villain here? Who's the fucking, the dude from The Watchmen, right? Like who's the fucking guy that is behind pulling the levers? Who's the Wizard of Oz here? And I think that's kind of ridiculous because it's just the world doesn't work that way. As much as we want to think that lizards are running the government and all that shit, it's fun, it's cool to think about, and it's like dope imagery, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And the first kind of instance I've thought about this is reading about this theory from this sociologist called C. Wright Mills. It's called the power elite. And this is the first thing that really kind of like made sense to me. I had read stuff about like CIA and, different like industries, like being able to, like we all know, I grew up in an era like, where Citizens United, where essentially it is now legal for corporations to, like money to buy politics, for money to be directly involved in politics, like corporations are people, etc. They have rights like people, therefore they can affect the political process basically legally. We grew up in this era, so we're kind of numb to it. Where did that start? Like who was involved with that? Like what does that look like on a practical level? Who are like the quote unquote Illuminati? Who are these people, right? And I think the closest you get to, without like, a total weirdo explaining you this shit online or whatever, is the sociologist C. Wright Mills, okay? He was this independent intellectual from Texas who taught at Columbia, so he's a professor, he's a PhD, but I know like that makes him sound like some pencil neck nerd or whatever. No, this guy was legit. He, by all accounts, he was like, he lived in a farmhouse in rural New York, outside of New York City, and he drove to work every day on a motorcycle he made with his own hands. This guy, he was big shoulders. You can look at photos of him. He was like what all these like new conservatives like LARP as, right? Like this like everyday man, like all hands and like diesel, like fucking engine grease on their hands and shit, and independent thinker, right? Like I'm an independent, like he actually was all that shit. And he was primarily, he kind of, even though I think he could be described maybe on the left, he would maintain he was an anarchist. Take that with a grain of salt. I don't even know what that fucking means, but he definitely was able to avoid the trappings of like kind of the Marxist ideology that was big at the time in New York City. In the 1930s, we're talking like, in America, technically you're allowed to believe in whatever you want. That's what's supposed to make this country so fucking cool, is like there were communists, there were, capitalists, there were fucking whatever, all sorts of different, the fascists. There were a lot of those too, as we'll get to in a sec. But so anyways, he avoided a lot of those Marxist stuff. And one of the main things that he took issue with Marx was, if you're familiar with Marx, even just generally speaking, Karl Marx, the sociologist / philosopher, he had this idea of like the proletariat and the ruling class, right? The ruling class was the one that controlled the world. The ruling class was defined as like the ones who controlled the means of production. So the factory owners, the people that own the factory, people that own the businesses, they were, in a sense, the people that controlled everything, because everything went through labor. It was a labor way of looking at the world. C. Wright Mills disagreed with this, or at least disagreed with part of it. C. Wright Mills' power elite theory extended beyond Marx's business dynamic, and instead he believed that America was ruled by those who controlled, and this is a quote, strategic command posts of society. So it goes beyond just labor. He's thinking about that's the wrong way of looking at it. It goes beyond that. It's more than just the factories. And this is also a modernist spin, because back when Karl Marx was, making his theories in the 1800s, this apparatus didn't exist yet. But the theory of the power elite, to break down the power elite and the strategic command posts of society, there's 3 sections. First, you got the corporations, so the head of the corporations. 2, you've got the state, so the politicians. And number 3, the military establishment. So these 3 bodies of the power elite perpetuate and feed off a permanent war economy. Okay? We'll get to that in a little bit. And this was mostly birthed out of the Cold War. This idea of always having a threat, always having something that they could rally behind and point to as the boogeyman. And have you ever seen the show or watched the movie or read the graphic novel The Watchmen, you'll recognize kind of the ending in this concept, right? Creating a boogeyman that we can all get around, point our pitchforks towards, fashion our spears, and mobilize the troops around. And we'll explain, we'll go into a little bit about how that can be very beneficial to people in power. And then so amongst these 3 groups, the corporations, the state, the military establishment, it's very incestuous. So what you would have is, if you look throughout history, particularly this started around World War II, when big business started to infiltrate government in legitimate positions of power. So you have like a CEO becoming a senator retiring from office and then working for Wall Street. And then he marries the daughter of a prominent politician in Massachusetts, and then their kids go to a private university and hang out. It's they jump from one area to the other kind of with ease, and it's kind of one big boys club, right? It's like on top of that, they would marry one another's children off. They would drink at the same country clubs, play golf with the same people, have unfiltered access to one another. Their kids would go to the same private universities, the same universities that they probably went to, and so on and so on. And it was very gatekeepery too. Mills called this the fraternity of the successful. And so in terms of the hierarchy of these 3 categories of the power elite, the corporate chiefs, Mills said, sat on the top. Now, these are the CEOs, like the titans of industry. We're talking like the Vanderbilts, the William Randolph Hearsts, right? And now I guess like the Musks, or like the fucking Bezos and Zuckerbergs, whatever, those assholes. Also, then next to this, the corporate chiefs, you'd have the state, the government, right? So the senators, the positions of power, the rule makers, the president all the way up to, the secretary of state. These people that can affect and put into place to create the scenario, create the environment in which these corporate chiefs can profit, maximize profits, right? And then in between, though, and this is the most crucial part, I think, of the theory, the power elite theory, The most crucial part of the power elite were the in-between types. That's what he calls them, the in-between types, or the invisible elite. And these are the Wall Street lawyers, the investment bankers, basically those people who work for the corporate chiefs and that can move in between business and politics. So Vanderbilt, the William, like Elon Musk is not going to run for president. God, I hope not. But I don't think it'd be worth his time. Instead, though, loyalists, right? Like people that came up under him could run for president. They could be a senator. Like J.D. Vance, if you look at him, is like his connections to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel would never run for president. Fuck that. But he can support and essentially adopt, which is, their whole relationship's fucking weird, but he can groom, if you will, a person like J.D. Vance, who can run for, I guess, he's vice president now, but who knows, he was a senator before that. And, that way, you're fooling yourself if you don't think that these people have an allegiance to their overlords here, right? So J.D. Vance in this case would be the perfect example of an in-between type. He's the invisible elite. He's the messenger. He can go between business and government. Another good example is Dick Cheney, right? With his connections in the military. He would be a part of almost all three of the power elite, the corporations, the state, and the military establishment with his background in defense contracting. So basically, they ensured that the government facilitated a culture that would enable the maximum profit to business, conflating corporate interests with national interests. The in-between types, how I found out about this was through a terrific book called The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. Basically, it's about Allen and Foster Dulles, particularly Allen Dulles, who, if you don't know, was probably most known for being the director of the CIA, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency for the United States. Allen Dulles and his brother Foster were partners at a Manhattan law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell. This is in the 1930s. Sullivan and Cromwell is one of the earliest U.S. law firms to open offices overseas, internationally, that is. When things were first popping up and this economy was starting to go global, they were on the forefront of that. They were in Paris. They were in Germany. Get to that in a sec. Taking money, helping clients, everything from massive oil companies to chemical companies. Very powerful, very smart, successful lawyers in Manhattan. During the World War II, Allen Dulles was stationed in Bern, Switzerland being neutral during World War II. So it was an outpost for a lot of the Western countries to come together and station their strategic positions there. So they have like close proximity to the war, but they were safe and they could kind of figure things out. Allen Dulles overtook the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, in Switzerland during World War II, when that was a precursor to the CIA. CIA didn't exist yet. Wouldn't exist till the end of the 40s. So Allen Dulles is stationed in Bern, Switzerland during World War II, presumably to collect information and to help, bring about an end to the war. However, because of Sullivan and Cromwell, Allen Dulles and Allen Foster Dulles' law firm, because of their reach internationally, it just so happens that Allen Dulles has clients and friends who work in Germany, if you know what I mean, in that they are Nazis. So this is a unique situation for a American businessman to find himself in. One foot in the government and one foot in his private practice with unparalleled access to Nazis. That gives you a quick glimpse of what the power elite is. I think that's a great way of describing, who runs the Western world, really, but like America in particular, right? You've got these corporations, these richer than, and by the way, this is in the 50s. This is 50 years before John Roberts' Supreme Court legally sanctioned the control of the electoral process, all that stuff I was talking about with Citizens United, which is crazy that C. Wright Mills, this dude, this teacher who came up with this theory, like he was so ahead of the curve on this. But yeah, I mean, in a world where like billionaires are getting richer and richer and, the 1% shoring up all their resources, and it's pretty easy to understand that, right? It's these Silicon Valley fucks, all these sickos that, are richer than hell, them along with their sycophants in the government. And I would say maybe one element too which would maybe fall underneath the in-between types. I don't know. But the media as well, you know, is obviously complacent in this. But I feel like that's just a natural outgrowth of the corporations. So I would kind of lump them in together. But you can see how, you know, they are able to essentially affect these blinders that we have, right? That I discussed before is like these blinders, if you were able to take them off and look at them from the side, you would see, you know, a corporation engraved with a trademark probably on them, right? The goggles that you're wearing, the sunglasses that we have on that are creating this reality, this paradigm in which we're viewing the world, those are sponsored. Those are created by this power elite, right? Like seems to be very beneficial to them. The way in which the world has been going for the last 100 years seems to be in their favor, right? And I think that's why we're such a disconnect or a disillusionment. You know, there's this dissonance that we live with as Americans, and call it anxiety, depression, whatever. And I think a lot of that is because like we're not viewing the world in which the way we want to view it. We feel this way, this impulse, right? Like that doesn't feel like it's ours. You know, to walk by the homeless person, to scroll through the dead children, to pay fucking $300 a goddamn month for insurance that you'll hopefully never use or you don't even know how to use if you had to, right? While other countries that are comparable to yours don't have to pay for it at all. Fucking sucks. So we understand how, like, you know, let's just in the broadest terms, we understand who kind of controls this shit, right? Like who runs this country? You know, the IBMs of the world, the Chevrons, etc.
Now then, a specific and clearly defined set of circumstances under which the bombs are to be exploded is programmed into a tape memory bank. A single roll of tape
Strangelove.
can store all the information.
What kind of a name is that? That ain't no crowd name, is it, Sting?
The 25
He changed it when he became a citizen. It used to be Merkwürdig
A crowd by any other name, most of it.
We talk about the power elite and how they operate. I mean, maybe what the coal is, what is it that fuels these people, right? There's a theory called the Fourth Reich. The Third Reich being the Nazis, obviously. The Fourth Reich. This was, so I first found out about this through a podcast called Death is Just Around the Corner, which I strongly suggest, by a brilliant man named Michael Judge. I believe it was George Jackson in the book Blood in My Eye was the first man to use the term the Fourth Reich. There's a great explainer I'll link in here about it as well by Gabriel Rockhill. But basically, the Fourth Reich is a recontextualization of fascism, okay? So I think Alan Dulles and a lot of business people, as we'll get into in a sec, they didn't really necessarily have a problem with the Nazis. You know, if anything, I think there was some envy among them and the Nazis, the way in which they were able to essentially give corporations as much freedom with very minimal government interruption and build out an apparatus that was strong like Nazi Germany, right? I think there was a kinship in the way in which the Nazis went about running their society with these business titans, the power elite, right? I don't think, that they were necessarily all about the Holocaust, not that I don't think a lot of those people had the best opinions of Jewish people, but if you were to ask them, they would say their major complaint was that the Nazis did everything right, but they went too far with the Holocaust stuff. The final solution, not about that. They looked at the Nazis and they go, but how can we recontextualize? How can we repackage? Cut out the parts, all the scary parts where Hitler went too far, with killing and genocide and all that. How do we cut those parts out, but keep the apparatus of the Nazi machine, the SS, all the extra stuff? How do we capture that part and keep that intact and recontextualize that into our own team, our own side, right? Our own, if you want to call it country, even though I doubt these people even had much of a country alliance, but how do they take some of that sauce and make their own dish with it? We'll explore this from different areas, but basically the Fourth Reich is America. The Fourth Reich could be the CIA as the American SS. It's the new juggernaut. It's a softer diet version of fascism that's diluted and watered down so that it's palatable, right? And I think Hitler accidentally did his enemies, the Allied forces, a big favor in that, the Holocaust is the pinnacle of evil. It's the most horrible thing that's probably ever been done in modern history. Definitely, I guess. I can't struggle to think of anything else, but it is so evil that it's essentially run the smokescreen for fascism ever since. This theory, that's talked about in Gabriel Rockel in this article, that everything, when you call something fascist now, when you properly identify a corporate fascist act or something, you're tarred and feathered, or you're more, like, well, you can't compare that to what the real fascists did. Like, if you are to compare, Trump or something to Hitler, or, like any politician for that matter to Hitler, there's that laughable of like, well, they didn't do the Holocaust, right? And I mean, they're right, but it's like, that was such an evil example. That's the worst example, that every other bad act that happens after that in comparison is just laughed at. The idea that you would compare that to the people that committed the Holocaust is insane. So if anything, in a weird way, it's this perfect insidious maneuver in that you can take a little bit overtly of what the Nazis did, during their reign, and get away with it by simply not going too far, right? So when we talk about the Fourth Reich as a rebranding of the Third Reich, we can see this in examples like using forced slave labor at concentration camps becomes relying on slave labor abroad in developing and third world countries hidden from American public sight. Direct military aggression against sovereign nations becomes indirect non-military aggression in sovereign nations through forms of economic sanctions, funding and arming opposition groups and armies, and complex propaganda efforts, largely hidden from American public sight. Electing a dictator with absolute power who exterminates left-wing populist or nationalist movements and coalitions becomes aiding and bringing leaders to power who are loyal to U.S. interests in other countries who exterminate left-wing populist or national movements and coalitions in their respective countries. Bombing other countries becomes, well, they both do that. Merging of corporate and state power becomes political action committees, big budget lobbying efforts on behalf of special interests, corporations afforded same rights as individuals. So the key part with that is absorbing the apparatus of fascism, absorbing it, and getting rid of the unsavory parts like that pesky, final solution.
I want my full military pension and benefits under my proper rank. I want to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for my invaluable assistance in the toppling of the Third Reich. In fact, I want all the members of Operation Kino to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Full citizenship for myself, well, that goes without saying. And I would like the United States of America to purchase property for me on Nantucket Island as a reward for all the countless lives I've saved by bringing the tyranny of the National Socialist Party to a swifter than imagined end. Do you have all that, sir? I look forward to seeing you face to face as well, sir.
And this started with, just to be practical, when you're scrapping a company for for parts, right? Or you're scrapping a car for parts. When it became obvious that the Nazis were going to lose, the Americans started actually, taking a lot of Nazis, and despite FDR wanting to, saying publicly that he was going to, every single one of them was going to hang or spend the rest of their life in jail, it didn't happen actually. The most popular example probably being Werner von Braun, the Nazi rocket scientist who sent V-2 missiles crashing into London, was relocated to the United States together with a legion of German scientists and engineers. They moved different scientists and stuff that they found beneficial and had them work for America, right? That's like a practical example of them just, oh, they're talented scientists. Oh, they killed a bunch of people. It doesn't matter. I mean, we could use them on our team. Like, we want some of those Nazi bombs. Show us how you made those. And we'll, in return, give you a place in Connecticut, whatever. And no one will ask questions. Werner von Braun was not the only Nazi to be absolved of his crimes and join the American project. Operation Paperclip brought up to 1,600 Nazis into the U.S. to populate various governmental positions. Another 4,000 Nazis were transferred to the post-war German intelligence apparatus, known as the Guy Len Organization, which collaborated with the CIA during the Cold War. and anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 Nazis were relocated to help out other fascist regimes around Latin America. These free Nazis played a crucial role in training armies of terrorists around the world to participate in dirty wars, coups d'etats, destabilization efforts, sabotage, and terror campaigns, most of the time in collaboration with the CIA. So the power elite, and let's be clear with this, the power elite is particularly before the Holocaust stuff came out and, you know, Nazis are starting to become a problem. The power elite had no qualms with Nazis. You know, I'm not saying all of them didn't. You know, there were probably some like red-blooded, patriotic Americans, hyper-nationalistic that did, but the big guys, you know, there's examples in this book that are insane. Like in 1940, a Berlin banker, Gerhard Westrick, right? He's he wasn't maybe a part of the Nazis, but he was a Nazi sympathizer. He was a big business person in Berlin at the time. He would host parties in New York City and have U.S. oil executives, and he would spread pro-Hitler propaganda. Basically, like in the way that Jehovah's Witnesses or something will like, you know, have a party where you go get free cupcakes at your university, but then they tell you all about God and all that. This fucker was doing that with oil executives, you know, late into the 30s. Oh, this is 1940, sorry. So yeah, I mean, Hitler's already cracking skulls and is evil fuck. And this guy's having pro-Hitler propaganda parties in New York City. I mean, this is secured too. Like these were used as business maneuvers so that he was during these meetings, he would secure the continued flow of oil into Germany. He even went as far as to throw a party in the Waldorf Astoria after Germany defeated France, right? So very clearly a delineation between good and bad in that situation. And this motherfucker had the gall to throw a party in New York City with these oil fucks celebrating Germany's defeat of France. So anyways, these are the circles that the Dulles brothers are mixing it up in, right? Like these are their people. They represent a lot of these people. They do business with them or they're friends with them, right? You know, you ask yourself, like, well, what the fuck is this guy? Why would they send Alan Dulles then to Bern, Switzerland to be around all these, you know, close Nazis? And apparently FDR, who was the president at the time, did this on purpose. So he actually, for both Foster and Alice, he had deep suspicions of them and literally had them under close surveillance. So had them followed, and I was imagining like tap their phones and stuff, and sending them and stationing them in Bern was actually intentional. He called it a dangle, right? So it's like they would monitor them, and all the German people that he would bring in his office or who he would talk to on the phone, he would be able to identify them, right? Like he'd be able to call Nazis out of Germany basically and give them a better understanding. So they actually kind of used Alan Dulles' Nazi connections to their benefit, which is kind of embarrassing considering he would go on to run the CIA. To go even further into the power elite's complicated relationship with Nazis, one of the Dulles brothers' most controversial old Wall Street friends was Thomas McKittrick, who was the president of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS. You know, you're gonna, if you read any World War II book or anything about the Nazis, you'll hear about BIS. Originally created to administer reparations payments to German citizens after World War I, the bank would go on to play a pivotal role in the Nazi regime's ascendancy, helping them launder hundreds of millions of dollars in Nazi gold that was seized and stolen from their victims. So 5 of BIS's board of directors would go on to be charged with war crimes after the war, after the fall of the Nazi Party. One of those 5 was a man named Hermann Schmitz. And I'm definitely probably saying that wrong because I don't have a German accent. Hermann Schmitz was a client of the Dulles brothers. So this motherfucker worked. He was in offices, had lunch, had dinners, worked with this dude. He was also the CEO of a company called IG Farben. IG Farben. Again, don't know how to pronounce it. IG Farben is maybe the pinnacle of an evil company. IG Farben is most known for they're a chemical company that produced Zyklon B. Now, Zyklon B, most notably, was used as the gas in the concentration camps that murdered millions of Jewish people. It goes even further. IG Farben had its own concentration camp at Auschwitz even. So I didn't know this. Corporations could sponsor concentration camps at Auschwitz. So like they could have a wing like they would a hospital and hire the labor there basically. So the people that were there against their will, the Jewish people that were there against their will. And so they would use this labor until the slaves essentially got used up, or there's a German word for it, Gubrached. They were sent to the main Auschwitz camp, and then they were just gassed with their own chemical and killed. And then new ones were brought in, and they would work for free. And so IG Farben is a company that kind of had this, like, I mean, it'd be the envy of Amazon, right? Like this system of just bringing in people to work for dirt cheap, in the case of, you know, the Holocaust, free, but working them to their bones, and then charging Auschwitz to use their gas to gas them and kill them. It's a win-win. They're just squeezing profits out of the Holocaust. It's insane. So IG Farben, evil fucking company. CEO, one of the Dulles' main clients. This is a problem, right? But they don't care. The power elite, like I said, this is not an ethical thing. They don't care. It's not in their interest to care. Like I said, they had similar interests as the Nazi Party. One built on dependable industrial and private capital expansion with minimal intervention from governments. Now you think that the president of a company that has a literal Nazi on its board of directors would be a thorny PR minefield, right? Like I would like to see how they explain that. But it wasn't, obviously. You know, things don't change. Thomas McKittrick, the president of BIS, would routinely visit New York City as late as 1942. Well, this is back when, I mean, at this point, the Nazis were forcefully taking over Europe. This is, you know, they're in the thick of it. There's no plausible deniability. He would meet with executives of American companies such as General Motors and Standard Oil, an American bank president doing business with the Germans while the American people went to war with the Germans. Again, think about that. We want to believe in like this idea of, you know, a Marvel movie where like there's the good guys and the bad guys. There's the Thanos, and then there's the Iron Man and the Avengers, right? And they're teaming up against the bad guys, the definitive bad guys. You know, like the Allies versus the, you know, the Nazis. You know, we're all coming together to vanquish evil. And in a lot of ways, that is what happened, right? Like I don't want to take away the accomplishments of World War II, obviously, and you know, Hitler did die, and you know, a lot of people did, you know, get what they deserved when it came to that. However, the business, the chaos, the webs that are underneath all this, they don't care. Business is apolitical. Business is amoral. Good. I mean, as you know, businesses that make money are, you know, like if you look at like fucking the way our phones are made, the way that any of this stuff is made, the way that Nike makes their shoes, etc. It's like you go deep enough on any of these companies and you realize like the biggest ones cut corners. They don't have time to consider ethics. I mean, if you just think about climate change in general, it's these companies that have gotten us into this situation. It's their habits that are actually taking us into this weird dystopian future where the air is not clean to breathe and that pesticides that are on all our foods are giving us cancer. It's them, you know, and they use PR to obfuscate from that fact. But the point is that, you know, this is a great example of even all the way back in the 40s. It's like the business class, the power elite, the people at the top, they don't give a shit. They don't have ethics. And this is not a Republican Democrat thing. Like, I think they laugh at us for even thinking about that shit because it's pretty silly. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're going to get theirs, you know? So someone like Thomas McKittrick, who runs the bank, BIS, FDR did not fuck with this guy, right? Like, even the commander-in-chief, who, you know, is one of the few presidents who wasn't a part of this power elite apparatus, or at least not explicitly, right? Like, I don't think he was, you know, he's on record of having a very deep suspicion of big business, you know, and being well aware of how much they had infiltrated the government when he took office around the Great Depression. So needless to say, he did not fuck with Thomas McKittrick or BIS. In fact, he even moved to block the U.S. account of BIS for all the Nazi affiliation, using Nazi affiliation as the basis of doing so. Freeze all the money, essentially telling this Thomas McKittrick fuck, like, you know, we're taking all that shit. You can't conduct business in our economy with tainted money that was stolen from fucking Jewish people. However, Thomas McKittrick fought him in court. And when you're going to fight the President of the United States in court for your right to defend Nazis, who do you hire? The Dulles brothers. That's right. He hired the Dulles brothers. Alan Dulles was his legal counsel and successfully blocked the ban, allowing McKittrick to continue to use and hide Nazi money in America. That's a patriot right there, right? So again, Alan Dulles being the power elite, the in-between person, the hidden, the secret part of the power elite, as we discussed, the in-between person, the guy that's connecting these big industries with government policy, right? And FDR, as we said, who was not a fan of the Dulles brothers, he kind of goes to war with them. He gets wind of this, you know. And even though he was using him as a dangle, his fucking mask, things are going too far. FDR enacted something called Operation Project Safe Haven, okay? And this was aimed to track down and confiscate all the Nazi assets that had been stashed in neutral countries. So the Nazis were going, when they were invading places like museums, they were invading homes, they were taking everything. Personal items all the way to like art, right? Like priceless works of art, gold, family heirlooms, all this shit, you know, money, you know, you name it. Everything that they were seizing, they were stashing in different areas around the world, particularly in neutral countries. And Operation Project Safe Haven was an effort of FDR to essentially go and find and seize that, because what he feared was that after the war, once they won and the Nazis were taken care of, that the Nazis who were escaped, or the ones that get off, or, you know, what have you, would be able to go back and access these reserves of money and buy their time and then come right back into power. So he essentially wanted to throw dirt on their asses. Like, he wanted to be like, no, we're not only going to like defeat them, fucking hang all these assholes or lock them in jail forever. We're also going to take every single one of their dollars, all their assets, all the stolen shit, so that these like fuckers are, their legacy's done. There is no money in Nazis. Send a message too to the rest of the world. Allen Dulles and Thomas McKittrick, yeah, they didn't agree with this strategy. In fact, they had some issues. They were, you know, having represented a lot of these clients, they helped and instructed their clients on how to properly hide their money. Thomas McKittrick runs a bank, so he has access to all these accounts. And when asked to comply, having been so close to these Nazis, FDR asked these guys, you know, can you comply? They don't. They don't. They use the age-old technique of bureaucracy. They just simply don't comply. They lose files. They're late to file things. They say they can't find shit. Literally just having, there's like some example of like having people just hang up the phone, or like misconnections, you know, like just don't care. And this is all really just to buy time, because while this was all happening, Foster Dulles is back in New York City, and he's hiding these assets for German companies like Nazi-aligned German companies like IG Farben. He's hiding millions of dollars in these accounts that the U.S. government can't touch them. And this, you know, do so in corporate shell companies and dummy businesses, etc. But that's all to say. So the power elite, yeah, they don't have these allegiances. You know, these people that run these big companies, these bank companies, they don't care. They really don't care. However, it became a point, you know, where they couldn't hide from the fact that the Nazis were going to lose. Their boys were going to lose. They had to start thinking of the future, right? So as part of this Fourth Reich theory, hypothesis, if you will, about salvaging the parts of the car that they like, you know, a lot of these fuckers, they would get behind closed doors, cuddle around fireplaces, sip on expensive scotch. All these fuckers love scotch. Tastes like shit. And, you know, rich and powerful men from all the different industries, and New York City and their boys club, they came together, and they agree that the future, to borrow the fear-mongering of the Nazis, the future would be to go to war with communism. Communism would be, and it's not Soviet Union, right? It's not the Bolsheviks. It's not these like specific. It's more so the idea of communism. You know, the idea of communism, and the less defined, the better, right? Because you can kind of use it as this amorphous boogeyman, as we talked about, right? This growing national security threat, this ever-present existential threat. And so these fat fucks, these dandies walking around drinking. Imagine these guys just sitting around as, you know, the nation, you know, multiple nations in Europe crumbling, the Holocaust going on, and these guys are looking forward to how to protect their business interests amongst so much suffering, right? And just, you know, I'm sure it was a really tough conversation for them to get around, but that's really what's important in those moments is, you know, what's business going to look like afterwards, you know? This idea, again, of like, you know, it's the dead baby in Gaza, right? But you're scrolling past to look at NBA highlights. You know, it's like they're talking about business. The idea that there's tragedy and there's a Holocaust going on, but this concept of business, of like, how are we going to ensure the continued business numbing ways? Like, how are we going to keep the blinders up? What is the new way to power the blinders? You know, and so communist is that. you have a conversation with somebody about Gaza or whatever, and I'm sure, hopefully you haven't, because it can be pretty fucking awful, but, or even maybe you're listening to this and it's like, you understand, there's a part of you that like understands what's happening is bad, but there's also the other part of like, hey, but this is just Israel. It's a very complicated situation, right? It's just so complicated. We need a strategic ally in the Middle East, and Israel's had its own issues, and the Jewish people going back a long time. And it's like all of that shit could be true, but I just don't understand why like that can supersede children getting killed, right? Like shot by snipers or bombed, or, like 40,000 of them at the time of recording this. It's like there's just a certain cognitive dissonance. Looking at something that should be just on an evolutionary, on a biological level, should be abhorrent, should be horrifying. Holocaust, genocide, killing of children. Like, what the fuck? When did we start making excuses about killing children? And I get like the world is a complicated place, but it's like it should that should be second to holy shit, there's a dead child. Like, time out, everybody stop. And so you see this in the people at the highest levels as well. So I feel like there's a really scary parallel of like we are now have digested that level of dissonance that they have. There's also an element of being powerless for sure, but also that we can scroll past this shit on social media and chalk it up to it being a complicating situation. So we learned today about the power elite. We started by talking about this cognitive dissonance that we all have, and these blinders that we put up and things not quite feeling right, and then kind of identifying that we aren't really in control of much that's in front of us, and that it's this power elite, right? And then talking about their callousness and then how our blinders are very much exemplify the way in which they view the world. And then we talked about the Fourth Reich hypothesis, absorbing and rebranding the Nazi apparatus. And we're going to get into a lot more of that in depth in episode 2 when we talk about the Red Scare and the introduction of communism. Post-World War II, the Nazis, the one boogeyman is dead, and communism becomes the new boogeyman. Communism doesn't really quite have a head like Hitler, so it's a lot more lethal. It's a lot more ambiguous, And this is going to be used as a way of creating and punishing the alternative. It's a war for thought, war for your mind. So what came out of World War II, the realization that the power elite could utilize a concept of national security, right? You saw this in post 9/11, national security, to disguise its operations and justify actions that would be otherwise unpopular. So it's an emergency without a conceivable end. An emergency without a conceivable end. So all I'll say is, at the end of the day, try to be aware of your own blinders, right? Try to pay attention to when, it doesn't have to be a homeless person, or when you're scrolling through something. You don't have to even do anything, even though I do think you should donate to charity or whatever. Give the homeless person a fucking $1 for Christ's sakes, if you can. But just acknowledge, right? Call it mindfulness. I know that's kind of fucking lame, but think about it. Like, why are you keep scrolling? How is something like that not shocking you, right? Or, get angry. If you next time you look at your health insurance bill, acknowledge the insanity of this and be aware of funneling that anger through the narrow binary tubes of politics, right? It's not a left and right thing. If you be aware of your own biases. Resign from the corporate sponsored playbook and politics as spectacle. Disentangle your identity from external cultural signifiers. Stop fueling the fire of polarization and punching down at your fellow man. Instead, punch up at those in charge of the systems that suppress subversion and creativity and profit from exploitations of humans and nature. Educate oneself on power structures. Consume dope art. Take care of your friends, family, and community. Do what you love, and always fucking send it. So I have no illusions that this is, yet another podcast, vaguely left-wing podcast, that talks about CIA and all this shit. And not even well, I'm not better than any of those. But I just remember being confused, having my blinders up, and looking at the world and feeling very alone and very anxious, and depressed and whatnot. And it wasn't until I found, some of these more fringe elements on the internet, and I know that sounds silly, but it's niche. It felt like people that actually thought like me and talked like me, and that really made the world a difference. So unfortunately, those are going to be kind of hard to find, for various reasons. So what I'm going to try to do is, against my better judgment and my own taste, I'm going to try to make this as widely available as possible and try to push this out in front of people. And I know that can sound egotistical, but I just figured if it could be a bridge to one of the cooler, more important thinkers or ideas of essentially who I'm just taking this ideas from, none of this shit's original. It's someone else smarter than me came up with all of it. If I can get someone in touch with those, then my job and this podcast job will be done. And I'll be linking, if you go to the website, I'll have a link to all the different thinkers and people books, authors, whatever, artists that I like that talk like this or gave me these ideas. So I share the wealth.